Hello and welcome back to ID Boxing with me, your host Rob Tebbutt. As always, just like to remind everybody to please like, comment and subscribe. Turn your notifications on for more boxing content. Anyway, delighted to be joined this week by the one and only Mr. Andy Clarke. Unfortunately, Barry Jones again couldn't be asked to drag his little Welsh frame into the studio today, so it's just me and you. How are you, Andy?
I'm good. I think Barry's kind of playing hard to get the last few weeks to try and increase his market value. I think that's probably what it is. He's playing a long game here.
Yeah, a very, very long game. But anyway, no, it's always good to have you, and of course, it's good to have Barry. I think it's one of his daughter's birthdays today, so happy birthday! I'm sure he's definitely sitting around right now watching this instead of blowing out her candles. But anyway, stacked weekend of boxing, Andy. So we're going to try and get straight to it. We're going to start in the UK. I think it's probably a good place to start. Obviously, Matchroom Boxing returned, and the one and only Katie Taylor successfully defending her undisputed lightweight crown against Karen Carabajal. We'll start from the top and work our way down, I suppose. What did you make of Katie Taylor's performance? It kind of very one-sided, what I think we were both expecting beforehand, and so it proved to be on the night. Yeah,
it was really what we expected to see. I thought her opponent did pretty well, showed decent durability, was tough enough, but I don't think we ever expected that she would pose Taylor any serious kind of threat, which none of her recent mandatories have. And that's something we talked about last week, and that's kind of the problem. I really don't think she needs to keep those belts together. We speculated last week as to whether Eddie or Brian Peters have had that conversation with her. Maybe they have, and she just wants to, having gathered them, she wants to keep them, but she just doesn't need to. She just doesn't need fights like that. It's with the greatest of respect to the opponent or anybody who manoeuvres himself into that position with that kind of record. It's just a waste of Taylor's time. She's not thinking about retiring anytime soon. She's 36 now, and it's not even in her mind. But her team might be thinking about that day drawing nearer, and all they will want to do is get her the biggest fights they could possibly get her in the time that she's got remaining. And for me, that just does not need to include mandatories against fighters who are never going to beat her. It just doesn't. I think I saw Barry saying after the fights that she maybe looked a little bit flat, which I think is fair. But I think she, rises to the occasion, Taylor. She looked a bit flat against Sharapova, like Barry was saying, but then, we saw the fight against Serrano. And I think that's another reason why she needs the real big ones, because it's not like you don't get up for it, but if you just got that slight edge of fear in you that you could lose, that it's a massive challenge, that you're likely to turn it on in a way that you wouldn't if you don't have that.
You mentioned there about Barry, shout out Barry Jones, what he said about her performance and being a little bit flat. I mean, I guess kind of one of the narratives that has come along, so probably in her last half a dozen fights, I reckon, in kind of varying different degrees of not seriousness, but kind of, I think it's been said louder at some points than others that Katie Taylor is on the decline. Do you see that? Obviously, you followed quite a lot of her amateur career and all the way through as a pro. Do you think she's on the, not to be disrespectful, sort of the back nine as a pro?
Yeah, I think so, because you look at the age she is, I think it's inevitable that she is really. I commentated on her debut at Wembley Arena 6 years ago, and I'm really proud that I did, because I think when that journey started, we all believed that she could go on and achieve great things, and she's absolutely done that. But she has had some tough fights. The two against Bassoon were hard fights. We've got the fight against Serrano, of course, earlier this year, and she's been fairly relentlessly active all the way through her pro career, and she puts everything into every fight that she's got. I don't think she's very good at taking time off. I wouldn't imagine that she's ever really out of the gym. I'm guessing it would be difficult to get her to take any kind of a break, really. This is all she's done and all she's known for a really long time. So I think that would maybe be an issue, and I think that's really why you need to just keep her fighting as often as you can, at least two, hopefully more like three times a year. I mean, I do think she's probably in the same category as Tyson Fury, and we spoke about Fury last week when he said to me at the press conference that boxing would end up retiring him and putting him out of his misery, as he phrased it. And I think it will be the same with Taylor. It's a harsh phrase he used about himself there, but we know what he meant by it, is that he'll probably end up going on a bit too long. And I think Katie Taylor will probably end up going on a bit too long, because almost everybody does. And before she hangs him up, she'll need to be completely convinced that there's not really anything left, because it's her life. But while she's still near the peak of her powers, that's when she needs to get that rematch with Serrano, the winner of Cameron against McCaskill, Alicia Baumgartner, those kinds of fights.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I mean, it's in order to be at that level of an athlete, not just a boxer, you kind of need to be obsessed. I mean, there's a very short list. There's a much shorter list of fighters who have got out at quote unquote the right time without going on too far, or without losing below their level. I mean, kind of Andre Ward is one example, Mayweather another example, Joe Calzaghe, without kind of going on too long and spoiling it. But then you kind of look at.
But Mayweather was old though, wasn't he?
Yeah.
In terms of age, he pushed it.
I think he got to a point where, I don't know with him, because I feel like he probably still could have carried on boxing. I think at the time when he did retire, I feel like there was probably Spence at the time. I think I would have probably picked to beat him. And this is sort of the Mayweather, the Berto stage of his career. But yeah, you do have to be obsessed. I mean, for every kind of Mayweather, Andre Ward, you've got like a Duran, Chavez, like guys who went on way. James Toney, my favorite fighter. I don't
really mind if it doesn't, for me. It doesn't diminish a fighter if they go on too long and they lose a few towards the end. I tend to look at them at their peak and see how long that was and see what they did during that period. So even someone like Roy Jones,
I was going to say he's the.
It doesn't really bother me. It doesn't make him any less in my eyes that he chose to continue boxing, because that's what he loved to do, and it was at a lower level than people would like to see. But I haven't got a problem with that at all. You just want them all to go out healthy, feeling like they couldn't have done any more and ready to move on and do something else. That's the problem, isn't it? Because a lot of people don't find anything else. And I do worry about someone like Taylor a bit, because she's been up to her ears in sport forever, up to her ears in boxing forever, under a huge amount of pressure to deliver. She's taken that incredibly seriously. She's dedicated herself to it in the way that you have to achieve what she's achieved. And I do worry about people like that a bit as to how they're going to adjust to life after boxing, because it's going to be hard. There's no question about it. It's going to be hard.
So that's us talking about Katie Taylor. Here's what she had to say for herself after successfully defending her lightweight titles against Karen Carabajal this past weekend.
Just talk to me about that fight at Croke Park. It's been spoken about so much. How much of a career highlight could that be for you, and how much does it excite you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the only thing that would actually top what happened in Madison Square Garden a few months ago. It was a big homecoming fight in Croke Park, 80,000 people. That's such a special event, and probably the biggest event in Irish sport in history, and that would be a dream for me. And I still haven't fought as a professional back home, so to actually make my homecoming fight in the biggest stadium in Ireland, 80,000 people, that'll be a special event.
Final one from me, Katie. Does it have to be Amanda Serrano?
I think that's probably still the biggest fight out there. I think it's the biggest fight out there in women's boxing still. The first fight was phenomenal. Can you imagine how big the second fight would be? I think everyone wants to see that rematch, and I think that would be a dream fight in Croke Park, my dream fight in my dream venue, and that would be very, very special.
So that was the undisputed lightweight champion of the world, Katie Taylor. Look, I think it's all fair to say at this point that everybody's kind of clamouring for the homecoming. Croke Park mentioned in the build-up to the fight, and indeed afterwards. Is that got to be next? I mean, it doesn't have to be, but it is the one kind of significant thing that's missing from her career, is that big homecoming fight in Ireland.
Yeah, I think before she hangs them up, if I were her, what I would want would be to fight in Ireland and to fight in Las Vegas. She's done Madison Square Garden. Croke Park, people have been talking about for a long, long time. People might not be as familiar with Croke Park as they are with Lansdowne Road. I don't think it's called that anymore, but the rugby stadium, that's one that we'll have seen more over here. Croke Park's for GAA, for Gaelic games, but it's unbelievable. It's an unbelievable place.
80,000.
Yeah, it's incredible. And I think she could fill that stadium. And I don't think it'd really matter particularly who it was that she was boxing. I don't think necessarily people quite understand what a superstar she is in Ireland and what a superstar she's been for a really long time there. So 80,000 is very doable for her against almost anyone, I think. But a really good fight would make it easier. And Serrano, I think, because she's proven, we've seen that first fight, we know what we're going to get, or we think we do. So I think she would be, I think she would be the front runner for that. It would have to be in the summer, so maybe next, maybe the one after.
Yeah, I was going to say, you'd expect her to box. Maybe it's another mandatory, or it kind of gets thrust upon her in between now and next summer. I think the general consensus is it's the Serrano rematch that people want for Croke Park, for that big Irish homecoming. I don't know what it is. I think it's because we've seen it, and it was a great fight. It was a brilliant fight. There's no dispute in that. But I think if it was kind of going to be her last one, and it might be, even if it, whoever it is, it might be her last one, then I'd maybe want to see the Serrano rematch. But I think that's always going to be there. I think the Serrano rematch. I would like the fight that interests me is the winner of Cameron McCaskill, or McCaskill Cameron, whatever you want to frame it. And there's an opportunity there to become undisputed champion in a second weight class as well, at 140 pounds. It's just whether or not she wants to move up in weight, or whether or not that necessarily.
I would advise against it. I would advise against it.
Because it seems like she is what she is.
I thought that fight against Christina Linodatu was interesting because she won. It was the WBO, wasn't it? 140-pound title, and that was a hard fight. I thought that was a hard fight. She is a dyed-in-the-wool 135-pounder. She was 60 kilos as an amateur basically forever, which is 132. And I remember talking to her before her pro debut and saying any chance she might, with the longer professional training and all the rest of it, look to get down to super feather, and she was just no. She can make people come to her, and I think she should, because why take that risk? Why give people that kind of advantage? Baumgartner's another one because, she was at super feather. I'm sure she'd be totally fine to step up to lightweight and fight Taylor at lightweight. And I think that could be an interesting fight between the pair of them.
Yeah, I like the style clash between Baumgartner and Taylor. But I guess for me, it's Baumgartner moves up and Taylor's making another defense of her lightweight crown. I mean, how motivated she is by kind of becoming undisputed in a second weight class, who knows? But I think that would be quite a nice achievement as opposed to...
It'd be great. Yeah.
I mean, even like Cameron's boxed at lightweight before. She'd come back down. Yeah. I'm sure she'd make lightweight for that fight. Same with Jessica McCaskill. I'm sure she'd be willing to come down to 135 pounds to make the fight. But then you don't have the kind of distinction of being a two-weight undisputed champion, which I think may be something.
You could meet in the middle.
Yeah. Catchweight fight.
I'm not a massive fan of catchweight fights, but the only
who can make the weight.
Yeah, the only circumstances in which I'm kind of prepared to entertain them is when you've got a fighter who commands that kind of, it's not respect, is it? Although it is in a way, but they've got that kind of market force behind them that they can really call the tune. Mayweather did it. Canelo has been able to do it. Pacquiao did it. You're talking those kinds of names, and just with the one thing about the mandatories is that they can fill in gaps. We're saying, if she was going to box next summer, then she would want to box again before that. And that's what they can be used for. And maybe we're not privy to what's gone on behind the scenes at all times. Maybe that is what they've used them for the last 2 or 3 years, because they've been trying to organise these big fights, which can be difficult. And she wants to fight in the meantime. So that could be why that has happened. They just can't be allowed to get in the way of anything. And at this stage of her career, I'm sure they wouldn't.
Well, there's one person who's going to have an eye on what happens next for Katie Taylor, and that is, of course, Eddie Hearn, her promoter. Here's what he had to say about what lies ahead for Katie Taylor.
Katie Taylor retaining her undisputed crown. What did you make of her win and performance?
Good performance. I mean, obviously, if she only scores an 8 or 9 out of 10, automatically she's getting a bit old. But that was a good opponent. 19-0. They share 40-0 between them. And I thought she was awkward, the girl. I thought she punches harder than her record suggests. And I thought it was a good performance from Katie. Solid, won most rounds. And yeah, on we go. And obviously you heard from everybody, Ireland's next, and we can't wait.
Speaking to a couple of people in my post-fight interviews have suggested maybe it was a bit of she just performed above Carabajal in terms of doing what she needs to do to win, but is she also potentially on the decline?
It's hard to say that after a career best performance against Serrano. You know, they said that going into Serrano. I think Katie Taylor performs above the level of opposition all the time. If that's Serrano, you know, if that's Pursoon, if that's Carabajal. But obviously, sometimes you can drop your levels slightly if you're not in with an elite talent. So I thought she boxed well on the whole. Wasn't her greatest performance, but solid performance.
So that was Eddie Hearn. Yeah, it seems like everybody's kind of gearing up towards the Amanda Serrano rematch. Might see Eddie Hearn and Jake Paul at the top table together again. I think that'd be worth the admission fee alone. Those two have had a very interesting relationship over the recent months. I'm trying to work out whether or not, and that surely can't help putting a fight like that together, can it? The fact that you're kind of the two co-promoters are in litigation with each other, surely.
No, I don't think it's a great boost to the chances of it happening, to be honest with you. It's
Glenn Feldman judging. And...
Yeah, I mean, all of that stuff. Legal letters fly around in boxing like confetti at times, and you just wonder whether any of them really get seriously answered, or if you just wait for long enough, does the other person almost forget that they've sent them? It's very difficult to keep track of it all. And I mean, Eddie's had an interesting few weeks, hasn't he? It's not something we'll get into today, but he's had an interesting few weeks, and he continues to front up. To be fair to him, he's continuing to want to speak as much as he ever has. But it's been tricky, to say the least, and the cards keep coming, so the questions are going to keep coming.
Yeah, I mean, on legal letters, so the best way it was ever explained to me in boxing, because, you know, I've had one or two in my time. Somebody once said, getting a legal letter in boxing is like having a Blue Peter badge. You think you're very special and then realise everyone's got one.
Yeah, exactly. It is a bit of a rite of passage, isn't it? Yeah. In a way, yeah.
You have to earn your stripes, man. If you're not getting sued once in a while, you're not doing your job properly. But anyway, moving away from the main event this past weekend, of course, we did see plenty of other action at Wembley Arena. We saw Kiko Martinez, again, continue to roll the clocks back. I don't even know if he needed to roll the clocks back. I think the general feeling was, certainly from my perspective, that it was a very dangerous fight for Jordan Gill, particularly in the first defence of his European title. And so it proved to be. Kiko Martinez did what Kiko Martinez does. He went forward, he let the big shots go, and ultimately Jordan Gill just couldn't stand up to the power, Andy.
Yeah, it's the kind of match where, when you look back on it with the benefit of hindsight, I know you never liked it at all. It does seem like a mistake, because he's now a 5-time European champion, Martinez. You know, that's a level that he is very familiar with, that he's more than good enough for. We know that because he was a world champion, and, you know, in very recent history, having wiped out Kid Galahad in a fight that he wasn't supposed to win. And it was when he lost to Santa Cruz, wasn't it, that he kind of went back down to European level. And at that point, around 2017, and I thought to myself, okay, I quite like that, the fact that he wants to keep boxing, but he's thinking to himself, okay, I'll go back down to European level. Did that, won another title, maybe won it a couple more times. And then at that stage, people were thinking, okay, he could be somebody whose name it would be good to get on one of my fighters' records. And that's what Matchroom were thinking with Zelfa Barrett, who got the win, but he was very fortunate.
Very fortunate. And
off the back of that, he got the Kid Galahad fight, and then Warrington, and now Jordan Gill. And yeah, in retrospect, it looks like a bad piece of matchmaking, to be honest with you. And I just wonder what Jordan does now, to be honest. He had to come back from oblivion almost to get the win against Kareem Gorfi, which was enormously impressive. But that's 2 fights he's had now where
that's a lot of miles.
That's a lot of miles on the clock, those 2 defeats.
Yeah, as you said, I didn't really like the fight. I know it shouldn't matter at all. Obviously, kind of being independent, impartial media. I do like Jordan Gill. I think the way he carries himself seems like a very nice young man. That win over Karen Murphy, I mean, that's what it's all about. Like boxing, that is very much like the Danny Williams, Mark Potter level of kind of just plucking a win out of the jaws. I mean, no sport does it like boxing. You can never be 10-0 up in football and lose in the last minute. It just doesn't happen. But there was a lot of warning signs in that fight of Karen Murphy. Of course, there was the Enrique Tinoco fight, which by all accounts, there were some issues going into that fight. But still, that was a damaging defeat at the time where Gill was kind of unbeaten and forcing his way up. But the Murphy fight, I feel like there was a lot of warning signs in that. And Murphy's not somebody who's traditionally known as a puncher. And Kiko Martinez very much is. And you've mentioned the Zelfa Barrett fight. That was up at super featherweight, which is, kind of the best of Martinez was down at super bantam. And certainly in his, as he's got older and it's been more difficult to make the weight, he's filled into a very good featherweight. He's, he's made out of stone, like Spanish marble. And he can still very much punch. He had that bout with Zelfa Barrett where he was very unfortunate, as you've mentioned. Knocked out Kid Galahad. He broke Josh Warrington's jaw and was stopped on his feet, which I felt was a bad stoppage. He was cut up and he was marked up, but there was some quite agricultural offensive work from Mr. Warrington. No disrespect. I mean, it's not a tickling competition, as they say.
Absolutely not. Yeah, you do what you need to do.
Absolutely right. Yeah,
especially against someone like him. I mean, you look at he's got 11 defeats, but you look at who they've come against.
He's never lost to somebody with respect at a lower level than Jordan Gill. I mean, like he had the 2 losses to Randall Monroe all of those years ago.
Very strong European champion.
Exactly. Again, like we've kind of had these examples over recent times where you've had like, I mean, with the advent of like the WBO European and the IBF European, like European level, I feel has become diluted. And then you've got like your David Avanesians, Sergio Garcia, Kiko Martinez. They're legit European level, which means if you're not at that level, they're going to beat you. And they can kind of hang with really kind of within reason most people at world level as well, those guys. The elite guys, which we've seen Kiko lose to, you mentioned Leo Santa Cruz there, Gary Russell, like those guys, like, he's going to be in with those, he's going to get beat. But if you put him in with somebody who's not at his level, then what happened at the weekend happens. And
Frampton twice, Warrington twice.
I mean, you
gave them proper fights. Scott Quigg, at that point, it looked like he might be on the decline a bit.
He just caught him with a shot.
Yeah, he got chinned in a couple of rounds, but it didn't prove to be the case at all. And so that's 9 of those defeats. Zelfa Barrett, and then I think he lost to, he was called Taklani Undlov. It was a second consecutive defeat quite early. It might have been after one of the Monroe defeats. But
they were close fights. So
but that's... You look at some of the records, they don't, defeats. You've got to look at who they're against and in what circumstances. And okay, he's got a few, but it just doesn't matter. No. And he's just keeping on going and keeping on going.
It was a risk, particularly. You just felt that potentially on the back of that win over Karen Murphy, that maybe because of how torrid that fight was, and you don't get more torrid than being DDT'd and kind of like... hurt multiple occasions in that fight, and he really did pull the rabbit out of the hat. But the flip side to that is, look, if he beats Kiko Martinez, then he could fight for a world title. There could be, there's pros and cons to it, and obviously everybody's an expert after the fact, and you can look back at it and say that it was it was bad matchmaking, or it was a fight that potentially he shouldn't have taken at the time. But he would have had his reasons for it. But what next for Kiko Martinez, the evergreen Kiko Martinez? It seems like he's always, like, I put up, and I know that people want to see Mauricio Lara versus Josh Warrington. They want to see Mauricio Lara versus Lee Wood. Like, I wouldn't mind seeing Mauricio Lara versus Kiko Martinez. It seemed like I put it out.
Anyone would mind that.
Apparently they did. I mean, obviously Twitter's just a wonderful echo chamber where people are not always happy with everything apart from the giant pizzas. They love them. But when it comes down to it, like, if you look at what Kiko Martinez has done, I think I tweeted in his last 3 fights, he's won a world title, a European title. The fight that he lost, he broke the champion's jaw.
Yeah, you can't say that he's not worthy of
boxing like a Mauricio Lara.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I think people forget, like, Mauricio Lara's last fight was pretty one-sided, but the fight before there where he scored like a again, people remember the spectacular, brutal knockout, but he was hurt to the body in that fight. Kiko Martinez, I think, could box anyone at 126 pounds, and I'd be fine with seeing it.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, there's fighters at the weight class who I would pick to beat him, more comfortably than others. I think one of them would be Zurdo Ramirez. I think Zurdo Ramirez beats. I know you're a big Zurdo fan. And then I would probably, Navarrete's moving up. Navarrete versus Oscar Valdez, by the way. That's a good fight. They're looking to make that. But then outside of that, like Lara, I'd back Lara to beat him, but what a fight that would be for 3 or 4 rounds.
Yeah, it'd be great. Lee Wood would be great as well. Lee Wood, Kiko Martinez. I think an interesting one, Conlan would be quite an interesting one as well, because he's got Guerfi in Belfast, and I think they've done a good kind of rehab job on Conlan this year, because after the defeat against Leewood, they would have got him out twice, which is decent.
Yeah, for sure.
Mariaga and then Guerfi, those are good opponents for him. He wants to box for a world title as soon as he can, so maybe with that in mind, he wouldn't be wild about a fight against Martinez, because there wouldn't be a belt. There would be the European title, but I think he's looking beyond that, Michael. He wants to get back into a world title fight as soon as he can. But I think that would be, again, that would be. I'd watch that. I think that could be a great fight.
I think that's a great clash of styles. I mean, Conlan's obviously very slick, very tricky, very skilled fighter. And you got Kiko. You've got it's the boxer versus the puncher. There's Yeah,
I'm sure Michael would love to win a European title. I don't think he would undervalue that in any way. But I just know that he felt he was so close against Lee Wood, which he was. He just wants to get back up towards that kind of level and get a shot again as quickly as possible. But sometimes you have to wait, and in the meantime, you don't want to be stagnating. And if you could get a win against somebody like Martinez, it's going to be hard earned. That it's going to stand you in good stead going forward.
Well, I've heard what you've had to say about it, but we do miss Barry Jones here when he's not here. So we're going to throw over to Barry Jones now, just so he feels like he's involved. So here's what that annoying little Welshman had to say after Kiko Martinez's win over Jordan Gill.
Barry, Kiko Martinez continues to roll back for years. What did you make of his stoppage win against Jordan Gill?
Well, I've stopped betting against him now. I'll never bet against him again. He's just one of those guys, he has natural raw power that he never has to rush his work. And he caught Gill with a few good shots, and Gill's a really good boxer. Unfortunately, he came against a guy who's just an animal.
Barry, Kiko said after the fight he wants Lee Wood. Eddie mentioned Maurizio Lara, but for you, what would you like?
Oh, well, Lee Wood for the British interest, but him and Lara is just literally tie their shoelaces together and then battle each other. It's a war, an absolute war. So that's the fight you'd like to see. Him and Lee Wood's a war as well, actually. That's a really good fight.
So that was the one and only Barry Jones. Damn shame that he's not here to tell us himself, but we've got the next best thing, which is him away from us. I
thought you were going to say me for a second.
No. There's levels. Anyway, so again, Maurizio Lara, Michael Conlan, Lee Wood. Which one of those names would you like? If you could make one fight, would it be Martinez versus Conlan, as you've just mentioned? Who would you put it? Who you putting Kiko in with next?
I think if I were Kiko, I would fancy Conlan or Wood, because I think commercially that would be the best one for you. You'd probably get paid the most fighting one of those two. Conlan's interesting though, because I think that his next fight is his last one with Top Rank, as I understand it, and then we'll have to wait and see what he does outside of that. In terms of the pure clash of styles, I'd probably most like to watch him against Maurizio Lara. I think that'd be great. If you did that in Mexico.
You could do that in Mexico or
in
Spain.
A bull ring.
Yeah, something like that. Somebody said that to me, and it's a fair point, because somebody said, well, who's going to pay them for that, and where's it going to happen? You've got matchroom shows in Spain, you've got matchroom shows in Mexico.
Yeah.
You'd think that they
you
could
could definitely
really
find
cool
a home
with
for that. Yeah, Eddie would be all over that, I think.
Do something really cool with that, I think. Who wins that fight?
Yeah, see, that I'm really not sure, because Lara... I'm not completely convinced that Lara's absolutely top level, to be honest with you. But it was a magnificent win against Warrington.
And he can clearly whack.
Yes,
So
he
people
definitely
will always
can.
look at again, I mentioned a couple of fights ago, the fight where he was hurt to the body. He was in a lot of trouble in that fight before he got the stoppage. I spoke to Ben Davison, of course, trains Lee Wood. That's one of the things that they'd looked at. Look, this guy is not invincible. He is not, he can clearly whack, and he's awkward and he's dangerous, and he doesn't bring an awful lot to the table, which I think is the biggest thing for everybody.
Yeah.
But he's not indestructible, and he can be beaten.
No, that's it. And I think somebody as seasoned as Martinez and as tough as him, I would quite fancy him. I think I'd quite fancy Kiko to continue this Indian summer that he's enjoying.
Seems like Matchroom are kind of. Look, I don't know what the situation was with Lee Wood and his injury. I mean, I know the WBA are asking for receipts, so to speak, for his bicep injury. Such a boxing thing to happen, isn't it? Are you injured? Show me. But anyway.
Yeah, I never really understand how that works, because I'm guessing that it's probably not that hard if let's say in days gone by someone had feigned an injury, probably not that difficult to get a note from a doctor saying that you had when you hadn't.
Strange. But anyway, it seems as though Matchroom are trying to navigate towards Warrington versus Wood. That seems like a natural fight to happen at some point. Obviously, Josh Warrington's got to come through Bernardo Lopez. That's not an easy mandatory by any stretch of the imagination. But if he does come through that, you could quite easily see a big push for Warrington versus Lee Wood at some point early next year.
Yeah, because it just makes all the sense in the world, doesn't it? You've got a unification between two British fighters.
Would they unify? The regular?
I mean, it depends which way you look at it, doesn't it?
What's going on with Leo Santa Cruz? Who's he supposed to fight?
Who knows? Who knows? To be honest with you, I kind of gave up on Santa Cruz a while ago. It sounds a little bit harsh, but ever since he won the rematch against Frampton, I think his career has been really disappointing.
Yeah.
Really disappointing. Yeah. I don't know how much of that is down to him, but it's just not delivered at all in the way that we thought it might. We didn't get the trilogy, which we were told we would. I never really expected him to go to Belfast, because when you've just won a fight, why would you do that?
Yeah.
I know Frampton's still pretty irritated about that, but I'm just not that bothered about him anymore, unfortunately.
Kind of sort of dipped in and out, knocked out by Gervonta Davis in brutal fashion.
Yeah.
And then,
so, I mean, technically speaking, you probably wouldn't count it as a unification. I mean, the IBF wouldn't, definitely, would they? Because that's exactly their issue. We had that during the World Boxing Super Series.
I also had it between Carl Frampton and Scott Quigg before Guillermo Rigondeaux was very conveniently demoted, and Scott Quigg was... was made super champion, and all of a sudden we had a unification.
Yeah, it's one of those situations where I look at Lee Wood and for me, he is the WBA featherweight champion, but he's not, and that's the point, really, with that.
You'd think surely that they'll find a way to make Ray Vargas versus Leo Santa Cruz. Surely that there's going to be a way that they can make that happen.
You'd think so.
You'd think, but again, it's kind of like all of this posturing with the WBA, and there was purse bids, and then there was this, and now it's kind of, very strange situation. But anyway, moving on from this past, not from this past weekend, still very much this past weekend. Another European champion on the card, a certain Ellie Scotney, the Queen of Catford, boxed very well. European champion after, I think, half a dozen fights or so, 5 or 6 fights. Impressive performance. Another performance from Ellie Scotney where she's kind of stepped up to a new level, a new territory, and performed well.
Yeah, I mean, I've been a fan with her for a long time, because you just heard really good things about her all of the time. I just think she's got an awful lot to offer outside of the ring as well as inside it. She's really good to watch, but she's got a good personality. You could definitely do something with her on that front. Things went very quiet for her for a while. I know she was training with Adam Booth, and then she moved over to Shane McGuigan, and I don't know exactly what happened, but it seemed to take a bit of time, and it maybe wasn't the easiest thing in the world. But she could do the business in the ring, and it's as simple as that. And that's really what it always comes down to. If you can do that, then you've got something to work with. And when you add on the fact that, as I say, she does have a personality, and you could look to try and bring that out some more, or more than people have, then I would say that she's really quite a marketable fighter. And it's just good to see her do well, because she's very, very likeable. and she just really is good to watch.
Yeah, very good to watch. I think it speaks volumes. I mean, I go down to McGuigan's gym fairly often, and certainly in the early stages while she was there, I mean, you'd get a lot of them. You got world-class pros in the gym who would kind of stop what they're doing to watch her hit the pads with Shane, and kind of not taking notes, but looking and studying how she works in the gym. And this, at this point, she's sort of a 2-0, 3-0 female fighter. And you've got, European champion Chris Billum-Smith, former European champion now, Lawrence Coley, kind of stopping and taking a look at what she's doing. She punches very correct. She's very easy on the aisle. She's got easy on the aisle, easy on the eye. Very nice style to watch.
Yeah, she has. And you can pick that up immediately when you watch her. It looks like it comes quite naturally to her, or the other way of thinking about that is it looks like she's been doing it for a long time. She looks really at home in the ring, and that does take time. Some people never quite get it because it's just one of those situations where you can get yourself to a point where you've got a very workable technique and method, but it never looks all that fluid or relaxed. Everything can just look a little bit forced and mechanical, but she's not like that at all. And it's only a matter of time before she wins a world title. I guess the only problem she might have is that you're not exactly going to be queuing up to fight her if you've got a belt.
Obviously, the flip side to that is money in the female code isn't as readily on offer as it is in the men's, and Eddie puts a good offer in.
Yeah,
I'm
you can make it happen, kind of.
Sure, we'll get one of those champions in the ring. Okay, before we move on, there was a couple of first round blowouts, starting with seemingly everybody's favourite heavyweight at the minute. Certain Johnny Fisher, the Bosch Army, rolls on. Another first round stoppage win for him. Wasn't an awful lot to see of it, but I think I tweeted words to the effect. His opponent had gone 4 rounds, I think, with David Adelaide, I think last year. Both novice pros. I think it's important to, I tweeted that and people going, oh, well, David Adelaide's this and Johnny Fisher. They're both novice pros. They're both pros who've got an awful lot to learn. And, a first round stoppage win, the crowd go wild. There's certainly worse ways to spend your Saturday night if you're Johnny Fisher.
Yeah, and I guess the question with Johnny is, where do they go with him next? At what point are they really going to look to step him up? Because he's not been doing this very long.
No.
He sells a phenomenal amount of tickets. He's extremely popular. And when you feed all that into the overall machine, you don't want to get him beaten. I'm not saying that those ticket sales would be absolutely decimated were he to lose, because I think he has got a pretty loyal following behind him. I think they just love the night out. They like him. I don't think it's all about all aboard the hype train. We're off to Las Vegas to
win a world title.
Yeah, I don't think it's about that. I think they just genuinely like him, and I think they'll turn out for him pretty much until he finishes. Certainly for the foreseeable future. But that's kind of the question, isn't it? As to how quickly do you feel you can bring somebody on? And it's very difficult to tell because he wins pretty quickly, generally speaking. It's a not dissimilar situation we had with, and still have to an extent, with Fabio Wardley, where they were getting him better opponents and then he was beating them easily. And it was very difficult to work out where he is. But now that he's going to be challenging for a big domestic title, we'll find out. And with Fisher, it's a similar sort of situation, I would say. There's quite a lot of similarities between the two, actually, because Wardley came through white collar, didn't he? So neither of them have been at it very long. But he is, he's genuinely very engaging.
Yeah, he's a really nice guy.
Yeah, and he's never getting ahead of himself. There's no kind of like airs and graces or arrogance about him. I know that's the whole kind of, not shtick, because that's a bit patronising, but it is. He's authentic, and that's what people want. They want authenticity. If you met Johnny Fisher on the street, he would be exactly as you expect him to be, because that is him. And I'm always a massive fan of that. We were talking about it before we hit record. We don't need to go back into it, but we all know plenty of people who are not what they appear to be.
You know who you are.
They are not what they appear to be.
Andy won't say your name, but I will. Maybe.
When you meet them, they are not who they appear to be. They are not as advertised, shall we say.
Yeah, and I think that's part of it for me with Johnny Fisher is like, if he's grabbing the mic and going, we're just getting started and we're going to do this and Tyson Fury out, then it's slightly different. But I don't think he's ever got ahead of his station. And yes,
no.
He sells a lot of tickets, but I think you can see what it means to him. Kind of, you often speak to fighters who do a load of tickets, and if you say, if it was between you winning a British title or having that, what would you rather? And for the vast majority of the time, they'd much rather that. They were to be loved within what they're doing and having that loyal fan base. I mean, again, I sort of tweeted who next for Johnny Fisher, and we had some. Kamil Sokolovsky was one of the names.
He's too much.
Yeah. Cash Ali was another name.
Not yet. Yeah.
What was the other name? Nick Webb.
Dangerous, but I could see that. I could see that.
You could see that being over in 2 or 3 rounds.
Yeah.
So what happens?
Yeah.
Webb,
but this is the difficulty, isn't it? At the higher weights and the lower weights is there isn't an enormous amount of depth. So who do you go for? But yeah, like you were saying, would you rather have all this support or would you rather be a lot more anonymous and have titles? I think, people's champion, that kind of thing. People love it, don't they? And I just love it when I hear a fighter say, look, I don't know how far I'll go, but I'd love to just win a southern area and then just see what happens. Because that's really how you do it. That's how Warrington did it.
Just about to say it's how Josh Warrington.
That's how Chris did it, Chris Williams-Smith. That's how he's doing it. Okay, well, let's step up a level. Yeah, okay, I can handle this. Brilliant. I can do this. I wonder if I can do the next one, just build it like that. And you take people with you and you're not making promises that you can't deliver on. You're not making yourself look and sound foolish by calling people out who you've got no business calling out. And I think in an age of pretty rampant hyperbole, people like that.
He is 7-0 with 6 stoppages. And has had those 7 fights in. He made his professional debut, which I think is strange. It feels like a lot longer ago than the 20th of February 2021. So he's only been pro for 20 months.
Yeah,
which it does.
I wonder at what point they might stick him on headlining a smaller show.
They could do that against the Nick Webb.
Yeah, they could do. And I know that Matchroom would get hammered for it and say, it's not good enough, it's not big enough, but I'm tending to think these days that, I've done quite a lot of small hall shows over the last couple of months, and a packed out small arena with a decent title top of the bill. What is wrong with that?
Imagine him doing your call.
Exactly. We had a great night with Denzel Bentley, Marcus Morrison there a few weeks ago. What is wrong with that? That there is nothing wrong with it. You look at someone like, Nathan Haney, who's with Queensberry. They must be tempted to top a bill with Nathan Haney. I mean, some of the bills he's been on, he kind of has been top of the bill, really, because he's brought the punters. But, why not do that?
He's not boxed at York Hall either, Johnny Fisher.
There you go.
He
would sell that place out by himself.
Oh, 100%. Definitely he would. Okay, final one on the Matchroom card because we've not got much time. We have to whiz through this one, but luckily it was the quickest fight of the night. Gary Cully, first round stoppage win. Like what I've seen from Gary Cully, I have to say, it seems to be kind of knocking on the door a little bit, I guess, on that kind of fringe world level. I mean, admittedly, his opponent this past weekend, I don't think was any great shape, but seems like he's got a bit about him, Gary Cully.
Yeah, he was a good signing. He's one of those fighters who you look at and you can't really find any obvious flaws or weaknesses in. And I think he feels like he needs to make up for a bit of lost time, maybe, in terms of exposure anyway, and just really let people know who he is and what he can do. And the weekend was the perfect start for that. Ideally, I suppose, or maybe he would have got a few more ring minutes under his belt and gone through his repertoire a bit more, possibly. But I think there's a lot to be said for when you're making your kind of like promotional bow with someone for that kind of display, because it captures some attention, doesn't it?
Certainly does. It captured the attention of a certain Maxie Hughes, the boogeyman of the lightweight division. I think that's been kind of discussed, which I actually kind of snuck up on me a little bit. I hadn't really seen talk of that until Maxi Hughes popped up in the comments on one of our posts saying, "Oh, who's he fighting?" And then I see, "Oh, apparently those two want to fight." Yeah, that's quite an interesting one. Maxi Hughes versus Gary Cully. Does that do anything for you?
Yeah, why not? Why not? You know, Maxi's, again, you know, he's another really, really good story.
Yeah.
Somebody for whom the success came quite late. He would have begun to wonder if it was ever going to, in the same way that, you know, we saw it happen with Jason Cunningham and I think I've said previously, Josh Whale, fighters like that, where you just think, it's just never going to, they're not quite going to get there. And we'll all remember them and say, God, he was a good fighter, him. Do you remember him? But he just never quite got that title he deserved. And you love to see them get over the line and get that hardware that they can stick on their mantelpiece and, you know, tell people about in years to come. And I think he's in that space, Maxi Hughes, where, you know, bring him a decent fight, a big enough fight, and he'll do it.
Yeah, that's one of the good things about somebody like Maxi Hughes, who's had to take, you know, he had to take the long route, so to speak. And, you know, I think he's now at the position where it's sort of bring it on. I mean, he was going to fight Ryan Garcia at one point, which is just crazy to think. Like a couple of years ago when Ryan Garcia beat Luke Campbell, if you'd have said, oh yeah, he might fight Maxi Hughes in a couple of years' time, you think, what are you talking about? You'd think it was complete insanity.
Yeah, you'd want the person arrested, wouldn't you?
I quite like that fight. I do. Gary Cully versus Maxi Hughes. I think maybe Gary Cully needs maybe one or two more. And I think Maxi Hughes is kind of, as we've mentioned there, on the cusp of potentially getting a big fight. But anyway, moving stateside for the evening, we discussed his return, the incomparable Vasily Lomachenko against Jermaine Ortiz. I think we both discussed, you know, what type of Lomachenko were we going to see? He's 34 years old now. Jermaine Ortiz, while, you know, not boxed at the highest of high levels, unbeaten fighter, win over Jamel Herring. And Lomachenko didn't have things all his own way, I think it's fair to say, on Saturday night.
No, he didn't. And he had a fairly strong finish. And for me, he did need it. I think one of the cards had him winning 9-3, which was pretty generous, I thought, towards Lomachenko. And we were talking about him last week in a potential fight against Devin Haney, and we both picked Lomachenko. But the weekenders made me wonder because, like you said, he is 34. He has had some injuries. He's been relatively inactive, you could say, really throughout his entire professional career, because he's been boxing at that top level right from the beginning. So he's only ever really boxed a couple of times a year. And I just begin to wonder if the matrix is not unraveling exactly, but it's not quite all around you anymore.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. I think it's difficult. I spoke about this last week where I said that he is such a difficult fighter to discuss. Kind of, I mean, if you're a nerd or a loser or whatever you want to call it, like me, and you kind of spend all of your time speaking to people on the internet that you've never met and you never will meet, which is a very sad existence that I've kind of put myself in this horrible game. But anyway, enough of what a loser I am. And like, he is really difficult to discuss because I do believe that, look, was he hyped? Was he was a big marketing machine put behind him? Of course he was, but I feel like he was at one point the best fighter in the world. I feel like pound for pound, he was the number one fighter in the world. Did he necessarily have the elite names in their prime to go along with that? No, but I don't believe that was his fault. I don't believe that was his doing. I don't believe we saw a prime Vasily Lomachenko as a pro against another prime fighter. People will point back to the Teofimo Lopez fight. Look, I think as the years have gone on, he's become more of a lightweight, but still not a lightweight. And when you're boxing somebody like Teofimo Lopez, who, while a big strapping lightweight, is also a very, very talented fighter and boxed brilliantly on that night. Yeah. And I feel like that wasn't necessarily a prime Lomachenko. He had a layoff, which Lopez referenced himself in the post-fight. And this is not excuses. We're going to have people in the comments going,
no, these are facts. Yeah.
But he's become, I don't know why, but he's become one of the most difficult fighters to have a rational conversation about in boxing. I mean, boxing is, generally speaking, quite a polarized sport anyway. You're either one side or you're not. But with somebody like him, I don't understand where it comes from. I mean, I tweeted something like I felt was fairly innocuous and fairly obvious when he was stood in, I say face to face, but he was kind of stood with Devin Haney.
Oh.
Afterwards, and I felt like the size difference is
It's
enormous.
huge.
Like Devin Haney's a great fighter, and Devin Haney, that he may have been able to beat Lomachenko 2, 3, 4 years ago when it was first discussed. I don't think he would have. After seeing Lomachenko against Ortiz and kind of knowing the injury problems that he's had, and I also feel like Devin Haney has developed as a fighter, and I was really impressed with his just the way that he'd handled himself in both of those Kambosos fights. He was very cool, very calm, very measured. I feel like he would have grown from that and wins over Jojo Diaz, Linares, Gamboa. Okay, not, again, elite fighters in their prime, but still good fighters, good operators. I feel like he's developed and progressed from there. And I feel like now he's at the stage where I would edge towards him. But that's no disrespect to Devin Haney to say that I do edge towards him, because I feel that Lomachenko is on. I think he's very much on the back nine now. I don't feel like, I think what you've said there about the matrix not being all around you is right. I think he is kind of, we don't really see the kind of, to borrow a Barry Jones phrase, the pivot in Lomachenko, where he kind of faints and all of a sudden he's here and he's round the outside. And he's just lost for me that bit of magic and that
step.
Yeah, that explosive footwork where all of a sudden he's behind you.
And that's what happens. That's what happens when you as you get older. It's as simple as that. And I like seeing it. It sounds strange, but that's what should happen when you get beyond the age of 30 and you've got that kind of balletic but also explosive style. Unless you're on the gear, that is what happens. That's physicality, that's biology. And so when you see fighters slow down, and we've seen it, say with Amir, with unbelievable reflexes, great speed, very explosive, had a long career, but you could see that those tools were becoming less sharp, as they were always going to. Someone else who's a polarizing figure to talk about career-wise is Tyson. I had a discussion about Tyson over the weekend with a couple of people. Pal of mine, Chris Walker, put a tweet up showing him demolishing Michael Spinks and saying, this is the finest heavyweight performance of all time. And he was fishing a little bit, I think, but he's a fellow Tyson fan. And I just said, 1988 Mike Tyson, I would give an even chance against any heavyweight in history. And you get the same kind of thing. He's pretty sensible, the replies I got, but you get plenty of people saying, no, you can't put him in that kind of bracket because he didn't have the dance partners, which is what you basically just said about Lomachenko. But I don't think you can just rule fighters out on that basis of being kind of all-time greats, because
otherwise it becomes just a complete stato, and that's not what sport's about. Your sport isn't about...
You've got to trust what you're watching.
Yeah, exactly. And there has to be that element of it. There is a grey area. It's not just black and white, and he didn't box this person, he didn't box that person. I feel
you
like...
do what you can do with the people who are put in front of you, and it's not like Lomachenko's never boxed anyone who's any good. He was in with Gary Russell in his third fight, wasn't it? Nicholas Walters, who was smashing people at the time, Guillermo Rigondeaux, and all right, Rigondeaux's small, he's really a bantamweight, but he was that was massively hyped up, that fight, and you couldn't say that he's avoided anyone, Lomachenko. And it was the same with Tyson. He just ran through a load of perfectly respectable heavyweights, and he was undisputed, the youngest champion ever, undisputed linear champion. But it's not enough for some people, and for Lomachenko, it's not enough.
Even Lomachenko is either the greatest fighter who ever lived, and he only lost to Salido because he punched him in the balls, and he won anyway. And he only lost to Lopez because I know I mentioned kind of it, but they are facts. But he only lost to Lopez because of the inactivity and the injury and blah blah blah. And then you have the people who say that, he lost to Lopez because he would have never beaten Lopez because Lopez is better and he's just a top-ranked this and he's just a smoke and mirrors. I don't know where it comes from. I really don't. And it is... You do see it across, but I always say, Mike Tyson is one of them. Floyd Mayweather's another. Roy Jones to a degree, I think it's a little bit easier with somebody like Roy Jones because I think it's kind of accepted that when he was at his best, he was something really, really, really special. But he has become very difficult to discuss, Lomachenko. And I don't know why that is, but I do, and I don't know how you feel about this. I have noticed a slight changing of opinion towards wanting to fight Lomachenko in the last 3 years or so. Shakur Stevenson, who I do think actually quite does play things quite straight and sort of down the middle with how he approaches things. And he had those spars with Lomachenko a few years ago, and he kind of openly said at the time, "Look, I want to spar him. I want to know how good he is. I want to." And you can see that in Shakur Stevenson, that he's very much of that kind of, wants to be the number one. And if he's the best, I'll see if he's any good. And at the weekend, he tweeted, "Look, he's not the same fighter anymore. He's just not the same fighter." And that's not, you'll get kind of the most ardent Lomachenko fans say he is, and it's just because of this. And you get the kind of the biggest detractors say, well, he was never that. This is what he's been like his whole career. You even say it about Mike Tyson. Oh, he was great, but then as soon as he fought somebody who could fight back, he did this. And it's just not true. You're just kind of taking a polarized opinion and picking little bits of the story to kind of factor into your opinion on both sides of things, by the way.
Yeah.
So I think it's a very interesting position that we found ourselves in.
I'll tell you what'll be interesting with him. It'll be watching what Top Rank do, because that will give you an indication of where they feel he is. Because I think they just got this one fight left with Haney, haven't they? And then they don't know what will happen with him after that, because he has moved promoters a few times in his career. They held out and didn't sign with anyone for ages. They had loads of offers, but his dad, Bill, kept him an independent sole trader, which worked, because I think the deal he got from Matchroom and DAZN was pretty spectacular. And now he's been with Top Rank, and so you don't know what will happen with him. But Shakur, I think they'd be pretty confident that he's their guy, and they've looked after him well enough that he won't want to go anywhere. So at what point will they just think, okay, you know what, now is the perfect time not to feed Lomachenko to Shakur Stevenson because he's too good to be ever in that bracket, but they might think now's the right time.
This is the fight.
Now's the passing of the torch.
Yeah. Exactly. To put him over.
Because that's what that business is all about. That's what it's all about. They've had great times with Lomachenko, but there's nobody better than a promoter, and particularly with the matchmakers and the guys he's got behind the scenes, Bob Arum. They will be able to judge absolutely when they feel is the right time to make that fight. And when they do make it, make no mistake, they will want Shakur Stevenson to win.
Yeah, because he's the guy they can sell for the next 10 years.
There you go.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens with Haney. I believe Haney wants to fight. I believe Lomachenko wants to fight.
Yeah, so do I.
But again, it will come down to that. I mean, you sort of see Lomachenko saying in the ring after, is this lightweight or is this heavyweight? And Haney's a big old boy at the weight. And you get the impression that he's got one more down there, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe that Lomachenko fight. But as you've said, is Arum... Because then if Haney beats Lomachenko and then goes, then you've got Shakur Stevenson there, and he doesn't have... Lomachenko would have lost a lot of his luster, and it's not the same win for him. So he doesn't catapult...
Oh, it'd be nothing like the same.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It doesn't catapult Shakur Stevenson like it would do if he does it before. So it is interesting.
I mean, the ideal situation for Top Rank is that Lomachenko fights Haney and beats him.
Yeah. Or they secure Devin Haney to a long-term deal beforehand, and then he beats Lomachenko.
I think that's unlikely, just from the way they've gone about things.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that they wouldn't do it, just because they've, always been quite circumspect about that kind of thing. You reach a point in your career where if you get made a good enough offer, then you take it, don't you? Yeah. And it's not like you're signing with some clown show. This is Top Rank,
and he gets that ESPN platform.
That's exactly,
big,
which is massive,
big,
which is huge. It's absolutely huge.
That really is big. I think over here, we don't really. I mean, obviously, I feel like we do, but I feel like sometimes it's not really kind of considered how big of a deal that is. Boxing on ESPN.
Oh, Sports Centre's on every screen in every bar in the country.
Imagine do Devin Haney versus Shakur Stevenson on ESPN. It's some massive. Or big. Devin Haney versus Teofimo Lopez at 140 pounds. If they can make that work, and if they can make that happen. Okay, right. Before we kind of move on, a couple of quick things around that fight. A lot of this discussion has been around, Lomachenko not the same, Lomachenko not this. I was impressed with Jermaine Ortiz. I thought Ortiz boxed well. I didn't necessarily expect... I think he did a good job on an older fighter in Jamal Herring, who, was up at the weight, up at 135, admittedly bigger kind of frame-wise than Lomachenko, but still a 130-pounder. But I didn't necessarily expect Ortiz to box in the way he did, which I felt he was very good. He controlled the distance well. He was busy. There was, I think, the 5th round where it looked as though Lomachenko, I think he just started to get a welt under the eye, Ortiz, and it looked like Lomachenko was just pulling himself into the fight. But he was competitive right the way through to those championship rounds, where I feel like Lomachenko just closed strong, and ultimately, I mean, on my card, it nicked the fight for Lomachenko. On some of the other cards, he was already home and dry. But Jermaine Ortiz, good performance from him, and I'm excited to see him back in the ring soon.
Yeah, it just propels you into the mix, doesn't it? As you say, like those couple of big fights that he's had now have gone well for him. And it doesn't really matter what people may or may not think about Lomachenko if everybody's going to get particularly tribal about it. He is a massive name, and it was a good display. And there's just no possible way that anybody could say any different. And in actual fact, it's the kind of performance where, if anything, I'm not saying you will get more credit than you deserve for it, but I think people will probably err on the side of praising you overly rather than being a bit too mean because of who you're in with. So I think that there's a lot of possibilities for him out there now, definitely.
Could see Shakur Stevenson versus Jermaine Ortiz.
Yeah, that could happen.
Lightweight.
That could happen.
Makes some sense, doesn't it? We had some people, again, probably the people who were saying that Lomachenko was never no good, blah, 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 who had Jermaine Ortiz winning the fight, shocking as it may be. Before we move on, we're going to go through it with the Lomachenko and the now infamous kind of four kings, so to speak. We're gonna take Lopez out because one, he's at 140, and two, he's already beat Lomachenko. We're gonna go through. So, Devin Haney versus Vasily Lomachenko. Who wins and how?
I think Haney would. I do think Haney would beat him now after the weekend. I'm happy to change my mind on what I said last week. I believed it when I said it last week, but having seen the fight at the weekend, I do think the signs are there that he is slowing down, that nature is taking its course, if you like. Points, though. I think points.
Shakur Stevenson versus Vasily Lomachenko.
I think Stevenson has got too much for him as well now, to be honest with you. I feel like Stevenson. I think it would be. I think it would be points. This is painful, kind of having to cast Lomachenko as
like weeding out.
Yeah, as someone who is now not a full guy. He's never going to be that. But I get that with someone like Stevenson. I think if he went after it a bit more, he would stop more people. And I would give him a chance of being able to do it against Lomachenko if he decided that was what he was going to really go out and try and get. But I would say points for the pair of them, yeah, Haney and Stevenson.
Ryan Garcia versus Vasily Lomachenko.
I find that a more difficult one because Haney and Stevenson
sort of think defense
have got
first.
that level of technique, that maybe Garcia doesn't quite have. I can see Lomachenko still being able to make Garcia miss quite regularly and quite clumsily, possibly. I would go Lomachenko in that one.
And final one, Gervonta Davis versus Vasily Lomachenko.
I think Gervonta Davis has stopped Lomachenko.
I could just see the pain etched all over his
face.
We got the shot on Andy Clarke, so we could see the pain in his face.
It's not just because you watch people come through the amateurs and, hipster is probably my least favourite word in the English language. I just find it so irritating that, just because somebody...
Don't say that too loud, man. Hoxton.
Yeah, no, true, yeah. Just because somebody... like people banging on the door in a second.
They won't bang on the door, man. It's not
just because you say...
They'll be outside with a picket sign.
Yeah, just because you say that you actually did see someone fight like 10 years ago before, when this was all just fields.
Yeah.
You inevitably get accused of being a hipster. But with someone like Lomachenko, you just... he's done so much... But he's at that point now where this is what, as I said, this is what happens. And I wouldn't say against Ortiz he looked, he's not shot, he's not finished, but he's not what he was, and that we saw that really for the first time, I think, because he lost against Lopez, but as you say, Lopez boxed very, very well and is a really good fighter. And no one was disputing that before that fight happened. He was just a heavy underdog because the person he was fighting was seen as being, potentially an all-time great.
Okay, right. That's enough pain for you from Lomachenko. Sorry about that, Andy. I actually quite enjoyed it. I have to be honest.
Yeah, but you look at I wonder whether When he came through after the Olympics and he kind of started this trend basically for fighters having to move really quickly. And some have followed suit. Usyk moved pretty quick, didn't he? Josh Taylor moved very quick. None of them quite as quick as him, but we're still talking about multiple world titles, undisputed champions in under 20 fights, which is incredible, really, when you think about it. And I'm not sure we'll ever really see his like again, and that's another way how you can judge, who is he, what has he done. We're not getting other fighters coming through and fighting real strong, established world champions in their second fight, which is what he did.
It's like people like to throw that Salido loss. I mean, I like to throw the Salido loss at Lomachenko in his second fight. I mean, he's boxing for a world.
Salido missed the weight, didn't he? Missed the weight.
Close fight.
Pretty much, I don't think he ever really intended to make it.
No.
So he had a big size difference. He punched Lomachenko in the dick a lot, and it was very, very close. And I just think there was, at that time, there was a little bit of a kind of like anti-Loma feeling within dyed-in-the-wool pro-boxing people. I remember Larry Merchant, after the fight, he sounded a bit too pleased that Lomachenko had lost, if I remember rightly, when he was doing the kind of post-fight. And I've heard another interviewer say to Lomachenko something along the lines of, welcome to pro boxing or something like that. And you just think, don't patronise this guy. Like he's, come on.
Where does he stand for you before we kind of move on? I mean, look, we're kind of reading his eulogy a little bit here. Is what it is. But where does he stand for you? If he was to retire tomorrow, where would he go down for you? Is he an all-time great Hall of Famer? Where is he for you?
I mean, it kind of depends whether you combine those amateur and professional careers. I would say that he is in both codes. If you're going to take it as boxing as a whole, he has to be, because he absolutely is in amateur boxing. That record is absolutely mind-boggling. But so is his professional record, because every single fight he's had, apart from a couple recently, and his very first one, have been world title fights. And that's amazing stuff.
Just going to get his...
He would have to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. I mean, I'd be amazed if he wasn't. If he somehow wasn't, then, the people who get to cast those votes should have a word with themselves.
So he has a record of 12-2 with 9 knockouts. So he's had 14 world title fights out of 19 fights as a pro.
There you go.
Which is... It's an incredible record, an incredible resume, and I feel like the fight that we missed out on with him was against Mikey Garcia.
Yeah, and that was a shame.
That was the one.
It should have happened.
Yeah, the problem.
It should have happened.
There was a few problems in that fight. I think most notably the relationship between Top Rank and Mikey Garcia.
Yeah,
was ultimately a big determining factor in us not seeing that fight. But when Mikey Garcia, just after he'd come back, he was ploughing through people at 135. I think that would have been...
And it looked like he'd gone up and he wasn't going to come back down. And then he did come back down.
Yeah.
And you think it's on. And then next thing you know, he's fighting Errol Spence.
God, yeah. What? We talk about strange moves. That was a very strange move. But anyway, we're going to move on. We've only got 20 minutes or so. We've got 23 minutes. So I know 22 minutes. So I know that you... for your sins, weren't up watching the biggest star in boxing, Jake Paul, against Anderson Silva. So I'm going to fill you in on what happened. It was arguably the greatest fight of all time.
Was it?
No, it was. Do you know what? It was a good fight. It was a decent fight. I think it was kind of the best version of what it was going to be, really. Whereby you had kind of Anderson Silva, 47 years of age. Okay, I think he had 3 fights, 3 boxing matches. One of them was a long time ago, and the other one was against Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. So. Read into that what you will, but Jake Paul, doing Jake Paul things, man. You're headlining again, and a pretty clear win over Anderson Silva, and all roads lead apparently to either in his mind, well, Nate Diaz and Canelo Alvarez and Tommy Fury's another name. Here's one that I wanted to gauge your interest and opinion on, because I know that you know him. Jake Paul versus Vidal Riley. That's an interesting one to come out from Mr. Paul.
It is. Vidal's a novice pro himself. I wouldn't do that if I were Jake Paul. Just because Vidal has been boxing a really long time. He did a lot as a junior and a youth, as an amateur. And it went on the back burner when he was coaching KSI, but now he really wants to commit himself properly to professional boxing. I completely understand why things went on the back burner, because that was a huge career opportunity for him, and he would have been very foolish not to take it. But having spoken to him, not for a while, but he was very clear that he wanted to not waste the ability that he's got and the work he's put in over the years to make the most of his pro career. So I still think that's a bit of a leap for Jake Paul for me, who is improving, definitely. Every time I see him, he is getting better. He obviously does train properly and listen to what he's being told. And I do think, to be honest with you, that the bloke is, he's a bit of a genius, really, because you look at all of these guys. 3 years ago, I had no idea who any of these people were. And then all of a sudden, they kind of invaded our world. And I've never had a problem with them because what they're doing isn't aimed at me, and I know it's not aimed at me. But they've managed to build these enormous followings off their own back, because nobody does that for you. You know that from doing what you've done with Boxing Social and now with ID. You have to get people to click that button. You have to get people to pay attention and take an interest. And if you manage to achieve that's on you. Nobody can just bestow it upon you. He's got no intention of fighting Canelo, though, Jake Paul. Absolutely none. Absolutely none.
I think
he has been really clever with his boxing career so far, because you look at the guys that he's boxed, these former MMA guys, and you can't say that they have zero credibility, because they're combat professionals at the very highest level, some of them. But I just wonder at what point he's going to take on a solid pro boxer.
Does he beat Tommy Fury?
I think there's every chance that he does, because I've not really been very impressed with anything I've seen from Tommy Fury. I don't know about you. I think he's got the Fury surname, and for that reason, people will assume that you probably started boxing when you were 5 or 6 years old, and you've got that schooling and that ingrained technique and boxing DNA and all those kinds of things. But I haven't.
They're all just things that are just like.
Yeah, I haven't.
There's not even kind of irrespective of whether you've seen Tommy Fury box. Like you always say, yeah, but he's Tyson Fury's brother, and they grew up as fighting men. Like, what does that mean? Like,
no, exactly. Yeah, exactly. All you
that.
can do is go on the evidence of what you've actually seen, and from what I've actually seen, I think that'd be a good fight. Yeah,
it's a good fight.
Be a good fight. I'm not sure if he's really of a mind to offer it again. Is he, Jake Paul?
I think he said that he's interested in it. I think he'd come over to the UK and do it, and I don't know.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to see him box Canelo, though. That'd be a good one. That'd be such that's one for Canelo when he's doing his Mayweather versus Deji tour, which is something that we don't have time to discuss today. But we do have time to discuss another event going on in Abu Dhabi this weekend, which is, of course, Dmitry Bivol versus Zurdo Ramirez, in a fight that I'm really looking forward to. I think Dmitry Bivol's stock has never been higher after that win over Canelo Alvarez, but he goes into this fight, admittedly as a favourite, but against a real dangerous operator, or potentially at least a very dangerous operator in Zurdo Ramirez, somebody we've not seen box at the highest of high levels consistently over a period of time, but he has got his moment now. There has never been a better time for him to beat somebody like Dmitry Bivol on the back of that win over Canelo Alvarez. I just wonder whether or not Zurdo can get to Bivol often enough to get it done this weekend.
I do agree that it's the absolutely ideal time for him to be getting this fight, because, as you say, he's got a long unbeaten record, and he's been around for a really long time. But you can't, if you ask people to pick even like his 3 best wins off the top of their head, they'd struggle, because he's not really, you can make the argument he's not really boxed anyone. It might sound a bit harsh, but it's kind of true. But Bivol is the guy in that division. So he's exactly the fight that you would want. And before Bivol beat Canelo, he turned in some fairly underwhelming performances, to be perfectly honest with you. I remember doing his fight against Lenin Castillo, and I think part of the reason why he did flattered to deceive a bit after that one-punch knockout against Trent Broadhurst, although there were some good performances after that, is pretty much because he's one of these guys who will rise to the occasion. I think that is what he's about. And that was a massive win against Alvarez. And it was an upset because when you look at the bookmakers' odds and what the general consensus was, it was an upset. I saw a couple of people we know after the fight saying that actually when you looked at what they'd done in their careers and the size difference, it wasn't one. And I know exactly what they're saying. And to be fair to them, they did pick him to win, Bivol, so they have every right to be able to say it. But not many people were saying that was going to happen at the time. But I just hope he's aggressive and really goes for it, Zurdo. This is the chance. And it's not like he'll never get another one, but this is the chance.
Yeah, and as I say, is it kind of, if you'd have boxed Bivol on the back of, say, Bivol beating Craig Richards and beat Bivol, then I don't think he would have got, it still would have been a great win. You would have had kind of the ironed-on number 2 in the division, whereas now it's kind of, is it him, is it Beterbiev? But I still think Beterbiev, but it's very much sort of closer than it's ever been, particularly after that win over Canelo. But now, beating him on the back of like a very dominant win over Canelo Alvarez, that would be enormous for him. It would be massive for him. But as you say, I feel like the lack of experience or the lack of kind of experience of regularly boxing the top level guys, or even boxing a top level guy, I think his best wins are sort of Jesse Hart, Sullivan Barrera, those are fringe guys really, let alone kind of sort of like contenders, top level guys. So it's going to be a difficult one. I know we've kind of discussed that before, so we're not going to take too much time on Zurdo versus Bivol. But before we move on to another world title fight on the undercard, how do you see it going? If I had a pound, who are you putting your pound on?
Oh, I'd put it on Bivol.
Points?
Yeah,
me too. I think it'd be nice to see him get. It'd be nice to see him get hit early and just see if Zurdo goes in there at 200 pounds or whatever he's going to weigh.
Yeah.
He did against Dominic Brosel, and he can land something early, because I felt like part of the issue for Canelo, other than not being a light heavyweight, was kind of part of the same problem. Just wasn't able to really put a dent in Bivol. Wasn't able to really make Bivol think about what was coming back at him.
Yeah, that's what I mean. He needs to go for it, Ramirez.
He needs to create some sort of doubt early. If he lets Bivol get into a rhythm, and it's kind of, I think there could be kind of, it could be another one of a kind of a, not going through the motions from Bivol, but it might end up being a kind of a sound, safe 8-4, 9-3, where Ramirez, he wins a couple of rounds or 3 or 4 rounds by just kind of nicking one here and there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'd like to see. But on the undercard, Zelfa Barrett has found himself fighting for Joe Cordina's old world title, the stripped 130-pound title against, I just had my teeth done last week, so Rakhimov, because I can't say the first name without spitting all over Andy Clarke. Give Barrett any chance of, it would be an upset against Rakhimov, who, of course, a few years back against Jojo Diaz was, very, very unfortunate in some people's eyes not to become world champion. And Zelfa Barrett, while being an underdog, has the opportunity of a lifetime.
He does. It is a tough job because he's pretty formidable, Rakhimov. I haven't seen loads of him, but he's fairly typical of fighters from his part of the world, from Central Asia. He's from Tajikistan, I think, Rakhimov, and he's been well manoeuvred and well looked after. And he's bided his time as well, because he was actually, he agreed to step aside, didn't he, to allow Joe Cordina to,
which is why
fight
we're in
this
position.
Yeah. And then he was guaranteed that in his next fight, basically, he would get to fight for the title. And then, of course, Cordina got injured, and I had sympathy for Joe for what's happened. It's extremely unfortunate. But on the flip side of the coin, actually, it was fair. To Rakhimov, it was fair. Yeah. He's getting what he was basically promised. My initial reaction to it, I think, like a lot of people, was, how can this happen? He just won a world title. Yeah. I knew that Rakhimov had stepped aside, but I think there was a prior request to the IBF to delay, or it wasn't the first one, which kind of, again, like as heartbreaking as it is for Joe Cordina to work that, not lose his title in the ring, and after 4 or 5 months, I think it was. He's guaranteed the winner though, isn't he? Yeah, how he comes back from that hand injury is going to be interesting. It will be.
because that's not a nice one.
No.
Not a nice one at all. And whether or not he wants to go straight, I mean, I'm sure he will want to go straight back in and box for the world title, but whether or not he does, I'm not sure. But yeah, I mean, Zelfa Barrett has kind of done everything that's been asked of him. I think he's kind of, in a strange way, sort of responded and rebounded well from a win, but a very controversial win over Kiko Martinez. Had the win against Farouk Korbanov. Of course, gave Joe Cordina a good fight, and I thought Zelfa Barrett was very good in that fight. So he's kind of as ready as he'll ever be. It's just whether or not he can make the jump, because it is quite a jump from a Korbanov to a Rakhimov. But of course, it's something that we've seen Joe Cordina do, going from Korbanov to Kenichi Ogawa. But a hard night ahead of him, I think Zelfa Barrett's got on Saturday night.
Yeah, I don't think there's any two ways about that. I mean, I don't think, whatever happens, I don't think he'll necessarily be the worst for it. I think it's an absolute no-brainer when you get offered to fight for a world title. He wouldn't really have been expecting it. And I just wonder what kind of effect it being in Abu Dhabi will have, if any, because neither one of them is going to have any real support out there. And Zelfa, I'd imagine, would always have hoped that when he books for a world title that Eddie would be able to do the business for him, particularly for a vacant world title, do the business for him and get it in
Manchester Arena.
In Manchester, and have that home advantage. So it's kind of hard to know whether that'll make any difference or whether it won't. I don't think it will make any difference to Rakhimov, because, you know, his whole career really is massive home support is not something that he's ever relied upon.
No.
I think it's fair to say that. But he might find it quite liberating, Zelfa, you know, getting away from the intensity and the pressure of being a home fighter. Could go one or two ways, really, that. But I don't really, for whatever reason, I don't really worry for Zelfa that this can go so badly wrong that he'd never be the same again. Which is the only thing that I think in these scenarios you could worry about.
When somebody's jumping up levels.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, as I said, I think he's as ready now as he's ever going to be.
Well, exactly, yeah. That was exactly my thoughts. Why not do it?
Yeah.
You know, there was absolutely no reason not to do it.
And you think about, when we mentioned the Kiko Martinez fight, but you think about the fight with Ronnie Clarke. Were you at that fight? Was it York Hall?
No, but I watched it, yeah. He got put down viciously with an uppercut, didn't he? But he kept going.
Yeah.
And that was a great example of a defeat which really brought him on, and which was more, was better for him than all of his previous combined, probably about 15 wins at that point. You know, he looked more that night than he had done in the rest of his career put together.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, and final one before we let it go. We've discussed it or in patches before here. We were talking about Katie Taylor, but Chantel Cameron versus Jessica McCaskill for all of the marbles at £140. Going to throw it straight over to you, Andy. How do you see the fight playing out? Who's your money on?
I'm going to pick Cameron, but I'm aware basically that's because I know more about her, or rather because I've seen her more. I know plenty about McCaskill. I've covered a few of her fights, and she's got those two big wins against Breckus on her record. And so if you're looking at body of evidence, which is what I always go to normally, you would have to pick her. So I'm kind of breaking my own rules for it. But I do just feel that I just think Cameron's better. Not by a huge margin, but I do pick her out of those two. But it's a good fight, you know. I really like McCaskill.
Yeah,
you know, the way she's gone about her career. I think I've said this before. It's really important that. And Chantal didn't go to the Olympics either, although it was very much an aim, and she was in that setup. It just didn't happen for her. McCaskill's come through that route that kind of Hannah Rankin has come through in this country, where there wasn't that much of an amateur background, and the promoters where she lived, even the gyms where she lived in Chicago, didn't want to know. And she had to work really, really hard to get anywhere, go to loads of shows, market herself, pull a load of stunts. I think they put a picture on the back of a milk carton at some point, or they put someone else's picture on the back of a milk carton and who they felt was running from her and didn't want to fight her, and had to really persuade, I think, Leon Margules of Warrior Promotions that she was worth taking a punt on. It was, for her and Rick Ramos, the trainer, it was tough. Like, it was graft. So to see someone really get there and hit the jackpot is, you cannot begrudge them a single moment of it. And I don't think anybody does. But, she was good company when she came over to fight Katie Taylor, very approachable. And just another interesting character in the whole mix. I just got this feeling that Cameron's going to have a bit too much for her.
You only mentioned that about her journey up to this point of something that Andy Lee always says, that kind of your personality will always be mirrored in your fighting style more often than not. And you kind of see that relentlessness about her and the fact that she's, she is edgy and she's very much kind of gritty and wants to get in there. She won't be denied those breakhouse fights. So
she's got that. A lot of fighters have this, but I think a lot of fighters who maybe don't come through that Olympic route, particularly with the females at the minute, they've got that kind. I think this is a really healthy thing. They've got that kind of imposter syndrome. It's like they're staring at their opponent, thinking, "You don't think I should be here, do you? I'll fucking show you." That's she's got some of that.
Yeah, she's saying,
and I love that.
As does Chantal Cameron,
yes,
by the way.
absolutely.
Chantal Cameron can be a very nasty so-and-so in the nicest possible way before she sees this and I bump into her at a show.
Yeah.
But can really punches nice and long. I think it's a good style matchup as well. You've got McCaskill is going to bring the energy and come forward and throw a lot of punches, whereas Chantal Cameron can punch really long and punch really hard, which is kind of that's the kryptonite for a pressure fighter. Somebody who can catch on the end of shots and stop the momentum. And if Chantal Cameron can hold the middle of the ring and catch McCaskill with some big shots and have her thinking about coming in, then she can really make it her fight. But like Chantal Cameron, she's sort of no airs and graces around her, and she's you mentioned about in the amateur, she didn't have everything her own way, and even as a pro, she made the change from McGuigan to Jamie Moore, and she's kind of found herself in a position. I know they had what was it, sort of the semi-finals, and they were going to do it was going to be her and Kaylee Reese, and that was going to be the way it happened, and then that didn't happen. And
she's a film star now, Kaylee Reese, isn't she? In the newest series of True Detective, I think they've been filming it. I think I
did wonder what was going on.
I think she's
with
taken
her.
an acting role. Yeah, I think that's basically what happened. Is that she's been in that, or she is in that. I don't know where it is production-wise, but that's what happened. I don't know if she's even going to come back to boxing, so that was pretty unexpected. But yeah, Chantal didn't. We were talking. Me and Matt Macklin were talking to Savannah Marshall about this a while ago, and it's easy to, a while ago, before a fight with Claretta Shields a few weeks ago, and it's easy to look at Savannah, who went to 2 Olympics and was then in a massive, massive fight, and think, oh, well, that's a pretty much straight line. You can join that dot to that dot. Absolutely not. Yeah. All sorts happened, and I think it's been the same for Chantal, because she came out of that elite amateur setup where she didn't do everything she wanted to, and it was hard because people just aren't that interested. Yeah. They just weren't that interested. I remember they got her into a final eliminator with Annie Sanchez, I think it was in the end, wasn't it?
A York Hall.
A York Hall on an MTK card. And she was just banging on the door for a long time. She got herself, I think, into mandatory with the WBC for lightweight and super lightweight, and was just trying to just get that opportunity. And then all of a sudden it came. It would have felt like all of a sudden it came and everything started to happen. But for a long time, she would have been wondering whether it was going to.
She certainly would have. Okay, well, I think that probably brings us about to the end of proceedings for today. Andy, as always, thanks very much for popping by, because you can't rely on Barry Jones nowadays for anything. But it was always a real pleasure sitting down and chopping things up with you. And hopefully you guys have enjoyed today's ID boxing review, preview. Still not the podcast. I'm not sure why, but still. Thanks very much for stopping by. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.